On the night of January 17th, 2022, a 13-year-old boy named Jay Taylor quietly left his home in Gig Harbor, Washington, carrying a white extension cord. He walked to the parking lot of a nearby Safeway, propped his phone against a chain link fence, and opened a video call. On the other end, watching from a wealthy suburb of Hamburg, Germany, was a 17-year-old medical student who went by the name White Tiger. He had never met Jay in person. He had never set foot in Washington state. But according to prosecutors, he had spent months engineering this moment. First, entering a 12-year-old girl from Finland, then weaponizing her as a tool to push Jay toward death. The girl, identified in court documents only as LS, had been given a script. She set up the call and titled it Live, Laugh, RIP Jay LMAO. White Tiger then took over. He asked Jay if he had a rope. He told him to take off his clothes, and Jay refused to undress. Then he put the cord around his neck, stood on a raised spot, and jumped. 764 members watched the live stream. The video was copied, shared, and used as recruitment propaganda. White Tiger, later identified by the FBI as Shahryar Javan, allegedly became aroused as Jay convulsed on camera, then immediately began coaching LS on how to cover their tracks. Jay Taylor liked crochet. He played the French horn. He wanted to be a veterinarian and live in a tiny house. He was 13 years old, and he died because a decentralized online network, one that shares its name by coincidence with a rural Arkansas cult from the 1970s, had figured out how to industrialize the destruction of children at a speed and scale that no compound, no charismatic leader, and no theology ever could. So this is the story of both 764s. One was built from timber and theology, and the other was built from bandwidth and sadism. The name is a coincidence, but the psychology is not. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post several videos every single week on one of these topics, so if you're into that, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Now, I made a video about this online group a few months ago, and it's now come to my attention that there's actually a cult from back in the day that has the same name as this group. And as I was doing my research the first time, it kept popping up, and I was like, I need to cover this, but I was worried it would get confusing. So, since there's so much more happening with the online 764 organization, I'm going to discuss some of those similarities here in this video, but I'll make sure to link my previous videos down in the pinned comment below if you want an even deeper dive into this organization, the current modern online one. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Now, when most people hear the word cult, they picture something like the 764 organization, the one from back in the day. A compound in the countryside, a charismatic leader at the center, followers in homespun clothing, raising barns, and singing hymns. They picture a place that you can point to on a map. The real 764, the one the FBI now classifies as a Tier 1 investigative matter, the same priority level as Al Qaeda and ISIS, is none of those things. The online group does not have a compound, and it has no single leader. Its members have mostly never met face to face. It operates across Discord servers, Telegram channels, Roblox, Minecraft, Instagram, and even TikTok. And its victims are overwhelmingly children between the ages of 9 and 17. And despite all 56 FBI field offices running active investigations on this group, despite over 350 suspects under scrutiny, and despite Canada designating it a entity, most Americans have never even heard of it. Now, where the original 764 organization built its arc out of timber and theology, this new group was built out of bandwidth. The name is the same. A coincidence rooted in just a zip code, but the architecture of control is something the old world's prophet never imagined. Now, the 764 organization, the original, traces its roots to Elias Marshall, born in 1938 in eastern Tennessee. Raised by a steelworker father and a deeply religious mother, Marshall grew up intense and devout, memorizing long passages of scripture as a boy. And by the late 1960s, working as an assistant pastor near Chattanooga, he had grown disillusioned with what he saw as the spiritual complacency of mainstream churches. In 1970, during a prayer circle, Marshall experienced what he would describe as a divine visitation, a vision of a great ark adrift in a storm, filled with singing believers while humanity drowned in darkness. And he interpreted this as a prophetic mandate to build a spiritual refuge. Marshall would resign from his pastoral position and struck out as an independent preacher, blending apocalyptic Christianity with the idealism of the era's Jesus movement. His message, part end times warning, part invitation to communal living, modeled on the early church, it actually resonated with a lot of disenfranchised young people. You've got college dropouts, ex hippies, and churchgoers who just felt like their congregations had gone a little lukewarm. So by 1972, Marshall and roughly 15 followers pooled their funds and rented a house on the outskirts of Knoxville, Tennessee. And they would call it the Ark House. The group practiced radical communalism, pooled money and possessions, banned personal ownership, and adhered to a regimented schedule of dawn prayers, manual labor, and evening Bible study. And within a year, the house held over 35 people. So by 1974, local scrutiny and overcrowding pushed Marshall to seek rural land. So, in early 1975, the entire community relocated to a 25-acre property in the Ozark Mountains of North Arkansas, which they christened New Ark Farm. Members built cabins by hand, dug wells, planted gardens, and erected a chapel. Marshall's followers even began calling him the Prophet. He authored a set of teachings compiled in a handwritten booklet called the Book of New Light and blended that Christian fundamentalism with communal utopianism, and a strict Old Testament based morality. By 1978, the Ark had over 100 members and satellite houses in at least 4 states. Now, by the early 1980s, the group operated as a self contained society, almost entirely removed from the outside world. Daily life was tightly regimented: pre dawn rising bell, 2 hours of devotional singing and prayer, and then a full day of assigned labor. You'd have farming, building, cooking, sewing, followed by communal meals eaten in complete silence and evening reflection time, during which every member, including children, was expected to confess their impure thoughts out loud. All of the money from the group's small businesses, which were a bakery, all of their produce sales, candle making, flowed into a communal treasury. The members of the group received no pay. As I'm sure you guessed, all of the children were homeschooled on the compound with minimal academics and heavy religious instruction. By their early teens, most worked nearly full time as unpaid laborers. And physical punishment was institutionalized. Children were beaten with paddles and willow rods, often publicly, for infractions as minor as holding a toy too tightly. Adults would face shunning, forced confession, extra labor, or temporary expulsion to an isolated cabin. And information was tightly controlled. There was no radio, no television, and no unsupervised contact with the outside world. Love bombing is what drew new recruits in, and fear of damnation and total economic dependence kept them from leaving. Marshall also arranged all marriages from the 1980s onward and would pair members without regard for their wishes, including marrying teenage girls to older men. He maintained multiple spiritual wives, young women in their late teens and 20s who lived in his personal cabin and served as spiritual consorts under the guise of spiritual mentoring. And get this, contraception was banned. Yeah. Now, the cult's first collision with the outside world came through Rachel Bryant, a longtime member who fled the Ark in 1993 with her two children after witnessing her 5-year-old daughter beaten with a rod. And honestly, good for her. Her husband, Daniel, who was still loyal to Marshall, tracked her down and kidnapped the children back, disappearing into the cult's underground network of safe houses. So, for 5 years, the children were shuffled between communal properties under assumed names while the cult would stonewall investigators. So the FBI opened an investigation into the abduction. In 1998, an anonymous tip led agents to a house in Florida where Daniel and the children were living under false identities. The arrest and recovery of the children would make national headlines. Television news crews descended on the Ark compound, and 60 Minutes even aired a segment featuring two recent defectors. And the New York Times published a Sunday expose. The cult would issue its first public statement dismissing the episode as, quote, anti-religious bigotry. Okay, you're harming children and you have child brides, but yeah, it's bigotry. Now, the 1998 exposure triggered a cascade of government action. In 2000, Arkansas authorities executed a court-ordered welfare check on every child at the Ark, and investigators found some disturbing things. They discovered signs of physical abuse like linear bruises, healed welts, and even broken bones that had been mended without real medical care. The children only spoke in these rehearsed platitudes and would cast fearful glances at adults before answering any questions. The state decided, well, we're going to remove all children from here, but the cult's lawyers fought back, claiming religious persecution. A compromise between the two allowed most children to stay under strict monitoring. But the IRS would revoke the group's tax-exempt status in 2002 after finding evidence of welfare fraud and unreported business income. Rachel Bryant and two other former members would file a civil lawsuit against Marshall and his elders in 2001, alleging conspiracy, emotional distress, false imprisonment, and negligence leading to the death of an infant who had been denied medical care. Unfortunately, the case settled in 2004 without any admission of wrongdoing. A key survivor testimony came from Michael Gaines, a former elder who left in 2000 after Marshall proposed giving his 15-year-old daughter as a wife to a senior member, as well as Hannah Leroy, who was born in the cult and escaped at 19, who testified about a childhood without toys or books, beatings that drew blood, and a friend who had been married off at 13 and then suddenly disappeared. Michael confirmed that Marshall had stockpiled firearms also because they were anticipating a possible armed standoff with authorities. Now, luckily, membership would decline from a peak of around 250 to about 50 to 60 people by 2006. Marshall suffered a stroke in 2005 and grew very withdrawn and would die in his sleep in 2011. By 2012, the compound stood abandoned. Survivors would form support networks, would pursue education and therapy, and several even became public advocates. Hannah Leroy earned a psychology degree and counsels other cult survivors. And a memoir by another former member became a best-selling book in 2015, followed by a documentary film. Academics have analyzed the group as a case study in how charismatic authority and apocalyptic ideology combine in American religious culture. But now we're going to get to the modern day 764, which is considered to be the internet's most dangerous cult. We are going all the way down to Stephenville, Texas. Population is only 22,000 people. It's a town known for dairy farms, its rodeo heritage, and Tarleton State University. The first three digits of its zip code are 764. Now, Bradley Chance Cadenhead was born into what had been described as a devout Christian family that later unraveled. He was bullied relentlessly. A classmate would later call him an easy target, and by his early teens, he was experiencing psychological breakdowns and growing increasingly isolated. At 10, he became fascinated with graphic online content depicting murder and torture. At 13, his assistant principal reported him to authorities after he made terrorist threats, and then he was placed in juvenile detention. He would draw images of school shootings on school computers, but would drop out at 15 and retreat almost entirely to his bedroom. He told his probation officers that he stopped caring about anything, and what he built from that bedroom would eventually touch thousands of lives across dozens of countries. So before 764 existed, there was CVLT, created around 2019 by Rohan Rain, then a 23-year-old business school student living in Antibes, France. CVLT started as a Discord community during COVID lockdowns and evolved into a network that blackmailed minors into producing child SA material, or CSAM, and recording acts of self harm material that Rain would then sell. The DOJ described CVLT as, quote, an online group that espoused neo Nazism, nihilism, and as its core principles. One of the cult's leaders, Caleb Christopher Merritt, also Texas based, was arrested in 2021 after a girl on CVLT's Discord server, convincing her to run away from home and then kidnapping and R-wording her. Police would find them in Henderson, North Carolina, and she had carved his name into her leg. Merritt was luckily sentenced to 350 years in prison. But Cadenhead still found CVLT. He studied its methods. Through the online game Minecraft, he met an unidentified individual who would help him push things further. In January 2021, from his mother's apartment, he created a Discord server named after his own zip code, and he would later tell a psychologist that he emulated CVLT because it got media attention for blackmailing people into self-harm, but that 764 was meant to take it to a whole different level, a lot worse. And that's a quote. Now, 764 obviously doesn't exist in isolation. It operates within a broader, decentralized cyber criminal ecosystem known as the COM, short for the community, a loose network encompassing hacking, SIM swapping, and offline violence, with dozens of semi autonomous groups competing and collaborating. The COM functions less like a traditional criminal organization and more like a dark web bazaar. Groups form, splinter, rebrand, dissolve, and then individual actors kind of move in between them. 764 is the most notorious node in this ecosystem, but it's far from the only one, which is why it's so hard to track. There are so many offshoots: Inferno, Harm Nation, Cultist, Court, Cascar, H3LL, No Lives Matter, Maniac Murder Cult. I mean, it's insane. And they're all being operated by young people. They are all semi autonomous, but they share 764's methods and aesthetics. And this matters because it's explaining why arresting these individual leaders has so little effect. Because when Cadenhead was sentenced to 80 years, new leaders just stepped in immediately. They didn't need a prophet to name another prophet like other cults. Someone just kind of takes over. When servers shut down, new ones appear within hours. This network's decentralized, platform agnostic structure means that destroying any single node barely disrupts the whole. Researchers at the Global Network on Extremism and Technology have proposed, quote, violence-focused online communities as a more accurate descriptor than a cult or organization, precisely because ideology plays such a peripheral role and organizational hierarchy is just so fluid. And 764's operational logic is chillingly systematic. Members deliberately seek out children who are already struggling, kids with depression, EDs, gender dysphoria, histories of abuse, or even social isolation. They find them in mental health support groups, gaming communities, and e-girl subcultures on TikTok and Discord. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported that in 2025, they received more than 2,000 reports of tied to 764 or similar networks in just the first 9 months of the year. Victims' ages typically range from 10 to 17, though the FBI has identified some victims as young as 9. And this follows a consistent pattern. A 764 member befriends a vulnerable child online, often posing as a peer. They begin to establish trust over several weeks or months. They offer acceptance, friendship, and maybe even love. But then they start asking for things, some collateral. They want a personal photo. They want a confession. They want something mildly embarrassing. And once they have that leverage, escalation is rapid. Victims are coerced into producing explicit images, which would then become blackmail for increasingly extreme content. Children are forced to carve the usernames of 764 members into their own skin. These are considered to be blood signs and cut signs. They're encouraged and told to torture and kill pets, produce graphic self-harm content, and in worst cases, attempt or complete unaliving on a live stream. One mother who contacted NCMEC described how a 764 member made her daughter cut the group's name into her arm with a razor blade, then told the girl that she was a good girl and that they loved her. The mother said she couldn't believe her daughter's response, which was simply, "I love you too." So, how exactly does it happen? Well, members compile child essay material and gore material, those harmful videos, and they put them into digital archives called lore books. Now, these function as currency within the network and they are traded between members. They are archived in encrypted vaults and then are used to recruit new members or to maintain your own status and rank. And the more extreme the content, the higher its value. This lore book system serves multiple functions simultaneously. It creates an incentive structure that rewards escalation. So members compete to produce and collect the most extreme material. And then it binds participants through mutual complicity. Once you've contributed to or traded from the vaults, you're implicated. And it functions as a recruitment tool because this access to exclusive vault content is dangled as a reward for new members who demonstrate commitment by, you guessed it, producing their own material to put in the vault. So, the structural parallel to traditional cult economies is striking, where Elias Marshall's 764 organization used spiritual rank and proximity to the prophet as its internal currency, where members traded obedience for status, and status meant access to marriage partners, leadership roles, and the inner circle. The digital 764 has simply digitized the same economy. The currency is different. It exploits human need, this desire for belonging, recognition, and a rank within a closed community. But it's just like the original 764 group. Now, the structural parallel between the two groups extends well beyond their internal economies. Where Elias Marshall's organization used isolation and love bombing, the digital 764 achieves the same ends through platform mechanics. Anonymity enables coercion replaces physical confinement, and shame based blackmail functions as the new confession circle. And the threat of doxing or swatting substitutes for the threat of divine punishment. And both organizations share a critical structural feature: the transformation of victims into perpetrators. In Marshall's cult, longtime members who had been as children would then become the enforcers who the next generation. Not because necessarily they were inherently cruel, but because the system made complicity the price of survival. And in the digital 764, the same dynamic is playing out, but with accelerated speed. LS, that 12-year-old Finnish girl who pushed Jay Taylor toward unaliving, was herself a victim of months of and by White Tiger. She was given a script. She was a weapon, not an agent. The January 2026 arrest of a 26-year-old Pennsylvania member found streaming on Discord in a 17-year-old girl's home with surgical blades and amphetamines is another example. The man showed police deep scars on his own chest and told them that he was himself a victim of the network. So the line between predator and prey in 764 isn't really a line at all. It's a pipeline. Now, the Digital 764 is frequently described as a satanic neo Nazi cult, and its members do adopt that aesthetic. They use Order of Nine Angles imagery. If you don't know what that is, I'll link the deep dive I did on the Order of Nine Angles down below. And it includes runic symbols, accelerationist rhetoric. But researchers consistently find the ideology is kind of decorative. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue classifies 764's motivations as primarily nihilistic and misanthropic rather than ideological. Members are driven into sadism, dominance, and in group status. The FBI notes that motivations are highly individualized. Some people act from gratification, some social status, and some just want to belong to something. And this distinction matters if you want to really understand this digital world of 764. It's not a organization in the traditional sense. It's a decentralized network that uses extremist aesthetics and branding. The DOJ has created an entirely new classification to try to describe it: nihilistic violent extremist, or NVE. The NVE typology first appeared in court documents in early 2025 and describes individuals who commit crimes driven by motives rooted in a deep hostility towards society as a whole, seeking to destabilize or destroy it through widespread, indiscriminate chaos. It was created in essence because 764 didn't really fit in any box. The traditional cult framework doesn't capture its decentralized structure. The framework doesn't quite fit its lack of coherent political goals. So the government invented a new category, an acknowledgement that what we're dealing with is genuinely unprecedented. Now, in order to really understand the scope of the damage this group has done, we really need to talk about some of the victims. First, I want to start with Jay Taylor, who was only 13 years old. So, by early 2022, the pandemic had left Jay feeling isolated and lonely. He was in the midst of a gender transition, which deepened his vulnerability. On January 17th, 2022, he posted a message to Discord saying, "I'm looking for friends, preferably LGBTQ, for crochet buddies." And someone responded. According to the lawsuit his parents later filed, Jay was connected with a 12-year-old girl identified as LS, who had herself been groomed and by 764 for months. The network's leader directing her was that user called White Tiger, who was later identified by the FBI as Sharia Javan, that German Iranian medical student from Hamburg. Now, according to court documents, Javan had forced LS to carve his username into her thighs on camera, dismember a small bird, and cut herself to draw a tic-tac-toe board in blood, while 764 members called all the moves. When LS said she was wanting to unalive herself and just wanted a normal life, Javan allegedly urged her to kill herself on camera, then told her that she could stay alive only if she found somebody else to die. So LS, now a weapon in Javan's arsenal, was given a script on how to push someone toward unaliving and how to set up a live stream. And she pressured Jay into an unaliving pact. The complaint says that Jay initially resisted, telling LS that he felt better, he didn't want to die, and he had some good stuff going on in his life. But the pressure continued, and eventually Jay agreed, saying he would hang himself because he didn't want LS to die alone. And what happened next is detailed in the Taylor family's wrongful death lawsuit against Discord, filed in February 2026. LS, following Javon's instructions, set up a video call and titled it Live, Laugh, RIPJ LMAO, and she invited 764 members, including Javon. Javon allegedly took over the call and asked Jay if he had a rope, and had become aroused and decided to tell Jay to take off his clothes. But Jay refused to undress. Instead, he walked to a nearby Safeway parking lot in Gig Harbor, propped his phone up near a chain link fence with a rope attached, put the rope around his neck, stood on a raised spot, and jumped. According to the complaint, Jay twitched and convulsed while Javon watched, and he became aroused. And then he began talking with LS about how to cover up what had happened. But the video was copied, shared on Discord, and used as recruitment propaganda for the network. Members of 764 considered a live streamed unaliving as the ultimate trophy. It's so utterly heartbreaking because I think if you're a parent, you'll know more than me. And I know that there's going to be some people saying, well, they should be monitoring what they're looking at online. And I'm sure parents do. I'm sure most parents have protections, but there are ways to get around them. Teenagers are smart. I mean, I remember being 14 and I was definitely in chat rooms that I shouldn't have been in purely out of curiosity. And if I hadn't been raised by a single mom who kind of instilled the fear of strangers into me at a very young age, it's a possibility I could have met the wrong person at the wrong time. I mean, that Dateline show To Catch a Predator existed for a reason. And this is like that, but like to the 10th degree. Now I want to talk about a 14-year-old named Eve from Oklahoma. Now, she was encouraged by her art teacher to download Discord to share her artwork. And she was drawn to horror content and happened to stumble into a 764 server. Now, after a 2-month grooming period by a user called Brad, who was one of Cadenhead's aliases, she was convinced to send him photos. Once they had that leverage, 764 members forced Eve to strangle her cat and behead her pet hamster on video. They swatted her family's home. They reported to her school that she had murdered animals. And the harassment climaxed when Eve was forced to sit in a bathtub and carve 764 members' usernames into her skin until the water turned red. And Jay and Eve are far from alone. The FBI estimates that thousands of children have been victimized. I mean, a single predator can have dozens or even hundreds of victims on this platform. Some Telegram groups associated with 764 have had 15,000 users at once. I mean, on my last 764 video, I had people commenting, "You'll never find us." This is a widespread concern that needs to be talked about more mainstream. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue reports arrests in at least 29 countries. Criminal extortion networks linked to 764 have been connected to the unalivings of at least 38 teenage boys in the United States since 2021. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received more than 2,000 abuse reports tied to 764 or similar networks in just the first 9 months of 2025. Now, in June 2025, the user known as White Tiger was arrested by German authorities at his parents' home in a wealthy Hamburg suburb. Officers found terabytes of child essay material on his devices. On January 6, 2026, his trial began in Hamburg's juvenile court. He faces 204 criminal charges, including 1 count of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder as an indirect perpetrator. Prosecutors allege that he victimized more than 30 children in hundreds of cases from January 2021 onward, when he was just 16 years old. Now, the trial was held behind closed doors because Javon was a minor when the offenses began. The Hamburg court has scheduled an initial 82 days of hearings running all the way through December 17th, 2026. Now, before the trial started, Javon was attacked by other detainees who shouted "White Tiger" at him while he was being transferred to the court. The legal theory at the heart of the case is genuinely novel. Prosecutors are arguing, quote, double indirect perpetration, that Javon murdered Jay Taylor not by his own hand and not even through a single intermediary, but by coercing LS into coercing Jay. Javon's defense lawyer, Christian Yüksel, has called this construct experimental and factually incorrect. The outcome would, though, set the precedent for how jurisdictions worldwide prosecute online coercion that results in death. German law explicitly criminalizes such coercion. American law, as of this recording, does not. But if convicted, Javon faces 6 months to 10 years in a young offenders institution, the maximum sentence under German juvenile sentencing, which I feel like he deserves more time in prison and should be tried as an adult, but I guess that's just me. We'll see how this all plays out. Now, in October 2025, stateside, the DOJ took the extraordinary step of filing the first ever federal terrorism charge against a 764 member. Baron Kane Martin, 21, of Tucson, Arizona, who used the handle convict and called himself the king of extortion, was hit with a 29-count superseding indictment that includes conspiracy to provide material support to conspiracy to kill or maim persons in a foreign country, murder for hire, 5 counts of producing CSAM, 11 counts of distributing CSAM, 3 counts of coercing minors, 3 counts of cyber stalking, animal crushing charges, and participating in a child exploitation enterprise. Whew, that is a mouthful. Now, this indictment alleges that Martin joined 764 in 2019 using at least 15 different online monikers. He allegedly authored a detailed guide instructing readers on how to identify, groom, and extort vulnerable juveniles, advising them to specifically target children struggling with mental health. He ran, quote, group chats on social media platforms where he controlled access and made demands of victims. Among the 9 special victims cited in the indictment, 8 of whom were minors between 11 and 15, Martin allegedly coerced a 13-year-old girl overseas into stomping on her hamster's head and feeding it to her dog on camera, conducted a live extortion of an 18-year-old overseas who was forced to cut a symbol into her forehead, and offered to pay someone $3,000 to murder the grandmother of a victim who resisted his demands. Now, Martin's trial is scheduled to begin in June of this year. The charge is legally significant beyond this individual case because by deploying a statute traditionally reserved for international, the DOJ has signaled that NVE networks like 764 constitute enterprises. They engage in organized campaigns of violence that are designed to destabilize and degrade society. Now, this move does not mean that the U.S. government has formally designated 764 as a organization like ISIS or Al Qaeda, but it does signify that the government believes 764 members engage in activity under U.S. law. Now, luckily, there are several people who are being prosecuted right now. And as those trials begin later in this year, I will definitely be covering them for you and updating them. But I want to take a minute to talk about Discord because that's where 764 was born. Cadenhead chose this platform deliberately because its young user base and minimal moderation. The Taylor family's wrongful death lawsuit alleges that Discord supplied 764 with unlimited victims and had only about 79 trust and safety employees in 2022. Now, Discord maintains that combating 764 has been among its highest priorities since 2021 and says that it's removed thousands of servers and banned hundreds of thousands of users. Now, Discord's tips have also directly led to multiple arrests, including Cadenhead and several other members of the cult. But the platform question extends beyond Discord. 764 activity has been documented on Telegram, Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, Twitch, Steam, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, and even X. The network's platform agnostic structure means that shutting it down on one device merely pushes it to another. The FBI has said both Discord and other companies are cooperating with them and have helped agents make arrests, but the structural incentives remain unchanged. Platforms are designed to maximize engagement, and predators just exploit that design. Now, Roblox presents a particularly concerning vector. Despite corporate assurances about child safety, investigative reporting has found games created on Roblox celebrating featuring Nazi concentration camp settings and bearing anti Semitic messages. The platform's core demographic, which is children under 13, makes it a hunting ground for 764 recruiters. And despite the wave of prosecutions, prosecutors face fundamental structural challenges. Senior DOJ officials have publicly acknowledged that coercing a minor to self harm isn't easily prosecuted under existing federal law. There is, as of this recording, no federal statute that explicitly prohibits the intentional coercion of children to physically harm themselves. What? Prosecutors have had to rely on child exploitation statutes, cyber stalking charges, RICO, and in Martin's case, a terrorism statute that typically is reserved for international threats. Now, German law explicitly criminalizes such coercion, but American law does not. A majority of the perpetrators are minors themselves, which kind of complicates prosecution even further. Now, in December of last year, the Ending Coercion of Children and Harm Online Act was introduced by Senators Grassley and Durbin. And this would close the gap by creating a new federal crime prohibiting individuals from coercing children into physically harming themselves, others, and animals. It proposes penalties of up to life in prison if the offense results in a victim's unaliving or death, and a 30-year maximum for non-fatal offenses. In February of this year, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance a combined package and called it the James T. Woods Act, named after a high school student who died by unaliving after experiencing extortion, which would bundle into the ECHO Act with the Sentencing Accountability for Exploitation Act, or SAFE Act, and the Stop Extortion Act. Now, it passed committee by voice vote. The package now awaits a full Senate vote. So, in February of this year, the House Oversight Committee also began investigating 764, and the Kids Online Safety Act passed the Senate 91-3, but then stalled in the House. Platforms argue that certain laws shield them, and victims' families argue that the business model of these platforms structurally incentivizes engagement over safety. And that's the trouble with social media and online platforms today, is they are just not advanced enough to protect the users themselves. It's pretty easy to get around age limitations online. It's really easy to get past parental controls. I mean, I think with technology too, kids are getting smarter and smarter every day. They're figuring out ways to get around these rules, and it's creating a very, very dangerous online atmosphere for them. And especially when they're being targeted at one of the most vulnerable times of their lives. A teenager in those early years, 10 to 14, especially, your hormones are changing, your feelings are changing, you're starting to discover yourself. You may or may not be experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. You may be getting bullied at school. You may be experiencing challenges educationally at school. I mean, it's a very difficult time. I remember going into middle school and then high school, and everyone said that high school would be the hardest time. And I remember thinking, no, middle school was the worst couple years for me growing up, just due to bullying and feeling like uncomfortable in my body and all the changes I was experiencing. And I can just imagine how vulnerable these children must feel now, and they're seeking out support online and they think they found it. And of course, they're not going to talk to their parents because teenagers seem to kind of distance themselves from their parents. There's a certain vulnerability that is kind of scary to talk to anyone about, and someone might feel safer talking to someone anonymously on the internet. And so I can only hope that something changes. Now, since I'm not a parent myself, if you are, please share some resources down below in the comments on child safety. I'll make sure to try to update you guys as all of these trials get moving, and hopefully this will set a precedent that will only help users and children online in the future. Please let me know what you think about this down below. If you have any more knowledge to offer, if you're more educated on internet safety, please let me know any tips down below to share with the class, I suppose. And once again, thank you so much for being here today. Please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye.